Benvenuti a tutti. Welcome to another edition of Italian America Long Island. My name is Dave Anthony Ducati. Today we have a very special guest who is the past president of the Constantino Brumidi Lodge in Deer Park for the Order of Sons and Daughters of Italy in America, and he is the past Poet Laureate of Suffolk County for the years 2015-2017. Please welcome, everyone, Mr. Robert J. Savino. Bob, thank you for coming on to the show.
Dave, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a wonderful thing to have you here. Tell us, Bob, a little bit about this. How did you get to be the Poet Laureate of Suffolk County?
A big surprise. Phone call. I got a phone call, and it said, "Would you accept the nomination to be Suffolk County Poet Laureate?" It was from a prior Poet Laureate who is a prankster. So I did not take it. I didn't take it for real. I said yes, I would. A couple of weeks later, I got another phone call, and I was told that I was selected by the board, and the board consists of 6 prior Poet Laureates. I'm the 7th, and they look at the type of poetry you write, that it's clean, that it's good poetry, that you get around, you circulate your poetry, people hear you, people see you, that you would represent the position well. So to represent the position well, they looked at me being a former president of the Sons of Italy, and also on the board, a trustee on the board of the Walt Whitman birthplace. So they felt that I would represent it. My poetry is good. I've won a couple of awards, and the next step was to stand before the legislature to get sworn in. So there's 6 legislators out there. They asked a few questions. They asked me to read a poem, and then they all voted. And the leader of the group said, "It's official. You are now approved as Suffolk County Poet Laureate for 2015 to 2017."
That's quite
how
an
it all
honor.
happened. Yeah, it very was. I mean, when you think of Suffolk County being like 1.5 million people, it was quite an honor for me.
It certainly
It was
is.
quite an honor.
So how did you get started with poetry?
I started getting interested in poetry in high school, in the 10th grade. I wasn't much of a student. I was more of a fun type high school person, more fun than learning, like many of us were. But when it came to Shakespeare, I started taking an interest. And after that interest in Shakespeare, I moved on to William Blake. William Blake, to me, was just a phenomenon in poetry. He not only wrote exceptional poetry, but he had sketches and etchwork and paintings to depict some of his poems. And he believed that we lived in the midst of eternity. And I just found that so fascinating. I mean, if I look at him thinking we lived in the midst of eternity, and then I look back to somebody like Dante, who talks about the real eternity after life, there was such a connection for me, and that's what started me going.
So you mentioned Dante, of course, the great Italian poet who wrote the Inferno. And do you have any particular interest in Italian poetry?
Yes, yes, I do. I think one of the greatest pieces of poetry ever was the Divine Comedy by Dante. That'll never be forgotten. It'll always be around. As Italian poetry were to fade, like some of it is, that would not. My Suffolk County Poet Laureate project was a book. I decided to do a book on Italian American poets, and it was driven by Dante. There's a couple of quotes by Dante in the book. There is 47 poets from Long Island in that book. They range from young and first published to professors and published with a number of different books. I had it translated. We had it translated in Naples, so it's bilingual. It was published by a local publisher, Local Gems, out here on Long Island, and it's just been my thrill. We have taken that to the Sons of Italy, the building, the book launch. I connected with students from the Comac High School Italian group in the high school. Italian, can't think of it now.
The Honor Society, or
Exactly.
the
That's what
Italian
it
Honor
was. The
Society?
Italian Honor Society. Thank you.
Yeah.
Italian Honor Society. So, and they came out to the Sons of Italy, and as the poet in the book, read in English, they read the translation in Italian. And the crowd, there must have been a 60, 70 people there. The crowd was awed by it. Either they followed with the Italian, or if they didn't, the beauty of a poem written in Italian far surpasses the same read in English.
There's something about that Italian language. It's just so melodious.
Right. Exactly.
So that was a fantastic project.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your Italian heritage?
Sure. My grandfather and on my mother's side came from Abruzzo. My grandfather, my father's side, and grandmother came from Naples. So that's my background, Naples and Abruzzo. And all the traditions that they had, we kept up with. My kids, not so much. I find it starting to drift now with the generations that are coming up now. But we still have a Sunday dinner, macaroni and meatballs, even if it's just the two of us, my wife and I. So, yeah.
And how about any trips to Italy? Have you taken? Or?
Just one. We went once on my wife's birthday, and we took the tour because we didn't know our way around, and it was nice. Venice was my favorite place.
Well, that's great. I happen to love Venice too. That was my favorite. My wife loves Sicily, but for me, Venice was like the adult Disneyland, and it was just a wonderful, magical place. Well, you've written some wonderful poems about your Italian heritage. Would you like to read one for us now?
Sure.
And what is this one called?
This one is called Ancestral Roots. Family and food pour into the foundation, crystallize a culture to fill pages of history. I wasn't born amongst pastoral shepherds in the green heart of the Mediterranean. I was born a young prince in the borough of Queens, the eldest of a younger generation, growing up with a family hamlet of cousins, aunts, and uncles, some with no relation to blood. I still eat pepper and egg heroes, the same as I once brought on Friday field trips while classmates ate PB&J spread on Wonder Bread. I drink wine from the same grapes as our backyard vine, season everything with hot peppers. Lamb, still the meat of my choice. How much are we so alike? So much I've become you. I often stretch upward, scan the width of the world, imagine the ceiling illuminated with the light of your wisdom. I am the oldest tree still standing, our roots spread across this new soil of plenty, with many who share the same recipe for love.
Wonderful, Bob. That's wonderful. Do you remember the first poem you ever wrote?
Actually not. I don't remember the first poem I ever wrote. I do remember the first one I ever published, and it was like in 1972. It was in Circus magazine, which was a rock and roll magazine, and it had a centerfold of the rock star of the month, and the back of that page was poems from our readers. And it was just a short 8-line poem about the whole drug culture in New York City that became around that time in the late 60s, early 70s. And that was the first one, and with no background at all for that. Just
Wow, amazing. All the way back in 72, you were already published.
Yes.
So now, do you have any more publications of your poetry? Do you have any collections or things
Yes.
of that sort?
I have a couple. One was a short book. It was titled Fireballs of Illuminated Scarecrow, and it was basically darker poetry at the time, and it was a group that we communicated with each other on the computer. So before Facebook, there was MySpace, and within MySpace there was a group of poets who got together and would post a poem, and the network would compliment you or give you criticism, depending on which way it was. And it was very different from what you see now. It's nothing like Facebook where everybody tells you whatever they're doing. That was a contact there, yes.
Okay, so that Fireballs of...
Illuminated Scarecrow was the first. Then the collection after that was Inside a Turtle Shell. Inside a Turtle Shell, for me, was specifically the title related to my personality. My personality was an introverted personality. I wasn't very outward. Kind of considered myself somewhat like the turtle. Slow, methodical, thought about it before he did anything. And if I wasn't happy with what was going on, stuck my head in my shell.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you're a very private person. Has your poetry changed that, or offer you opportunities to come out of your shell, or?
It certainly has. I mean, with the poetry at the very beginning, it was publications, getting published, submitting, getting published, not very much in the limelight. Then became, as the poems became better and people started recognizing them more, it was readings in bookshops. I was on a panel for poetry for the 100th birthday of Babe Ruth in Hofstra University, and then it blew out from there. You know, attending workshops to learn some more, reading poetry in different places. Now I get in front of a mic and it's easy.
Okay, so it's done that for you, brought your soul more out to the world.
To share it with people.
To share it with people.
That's what it's all about.
Now, do you have formal training in poetry, or what? You mentioned a group that you were part of. Could you tell us more about that, your formal training, and also the other groups that you belong to for poetry?
I had no formal training in college. My formal training for poetry was basically the workshops that were given by, like, the first Suffolk County Poet Laureate, George Wallace, or Nassau County Poet Laureate, Maxwell Wheat. They would give courses and I would learn from there. What really moved me along my way was my 10th grade English teacher says, if you want to continue to write, you remember this, and I'd never forgot it. Read, read, read. So I've read from back Taoist poetry to the French poets of Baudelaire and Verlaine, to the Italian poets like Dante and Boccaccio. That for me was my education, reading a lot and the workshops given by other poets.
So if someone wanted to become more proficient at poetry, what would you recommend? Besides read, 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 are there groups that they could join at the current time?
There's definitely groups that they can join. One local group is the Bards group, Bards Initiative. The president of that group is James Wagner, and he is also the publisher of Local Gems. He also published my anthology for me. He has an anthology every year and encourages new poets. For example, one of the greatest things I think I've done since I become Poet Laureate is I'm a mentor to a 10-year-old student. And we work together with his poetry, and he looks up to me as a mentor. But this young boy has a vision that is unbelievable. His name is Christian Martinez. He has a vision that's just unbelievable. And, you know, I felt that I was going into this as a mentor, teaching Roses are Red, Violets are Blue. And when he came back with this poem, we sent it to this anthology, and it was accepted. So at 11 years old, he read at the book launch this past weekend, and that's the greatest thing for me. So Local Gems Press is a local group that anybody can get involved in, and people have. I've met other people who have just started, who have written stories and was interested in poetry, and asked me about it, and I give them this website. I let them go to this website, get involved, and they not only have the opportunity to get published in the anthology, they have the opportunity to read at the book launch in Walt Whitman Birthplace every year, and as they grow, it gives them the opportunity to publish their first book. So he's one of the more active groups on Long Island. I also belong to the Poets and Writers, which is a national group where you just submit kind of a resume and they grade it. They grade it on points, and if you're acceptable, then they take it and your name goes into a directory where anybody looking for poets or writers by genre can be looked up and they can be sought after.
Terrific. So how do you go about writing a poem? What inspires you to do that? And what's the way that you work and you create?
I would love to say I was organized enough to sit down and write a poem, but I'm not. It's impulsive. I see something, I get an idea, and I will write it down on anything available. A napkin at the dinner table, anything you can think of. A poem that won me an award, a 2008 Oberon Poetry Prize award, I wrote sitting down on the floor next to one of those night lights at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 4th birthday of my first granddaughter, never changed a word, and it won the prize in 2008. What was more important to me, not just that it was my granddaughter, it was the first first Long Islander in 8 years to win that prize. So yes, it's an inspiration. It was her 4th birthday. I got up that morning and it just went. It just went.
Have you written poems that you have worked on for a long time? Is that also something that you've done?
I have done that. I have poems that I write, and it's like leaving a notebook for 3 days, come back, take another look at it, maybe do some editing, put it back in the notebook. Some of them I've written, published in a book, and as I read it from the book, change it as I'm reading it. So yes, I believe there's always change to a poem.
Now, when you do your creations, would you say your poetry is meant more to be read aloud or to be read silently in a book?
I've been told silently in a book. I have some that you can read and you can relate to, like the poem I just read, I think is easily relatable. Some of them you need to listen to twice, or most people say read from the book. I'd like to use a lot of imagery in the poems, and I'd like to take them to a different place. I'd like to take them to this place where I'm going, or where they may interpret I'm going, because it's interpretive.
Okay. Would you like to read another poem for us? Maybe an example of what you were just speaking about.
Sure. So this was the poem that I wrote for my granddaughter that went through the first time at no changes. Breakfast with Sophia. She wakes on a bed in the living room in the dark. She crawls to the foot and peeks over the edge to see if I'd been asleep at all. Then unhinges into a series of karate moves and says, "Grandpa, I'm going to beat you up." I engage for a short while, then quickly take to the breakfast table, a clandestine coward. After one period of Fruit Loop table hockey, she eats. I tangle with nocturnal words, aloud. She lifts her spoon, holding it like nunchucks, and says, "Grandpa, you a knucklehead," then follows me everywhere with her mother's eyes, a pastime of summer fun all over again. When she leaves, flowers in the garden droop. Crabgrass and dandelions peek out over the sod. I imagine her return as a teen or a young adult, reading this poem to me or saying, "Come on, Gramps, I can't dance to that."
Wonderful. Grandchildren are great.
Yes.
And how many do you have?
6.
6 grandchildren. Now, was Sophia the first one that you wrote a poem about, or have you
Yes.
done a series? Oh, she was the first. And what number is she?
She 4.
Number 4. Okay, but she inspired you in a certain way.
Yeah.
Shakespeare is famous for his sonnets. Do you like to write in any specific poetic form, or is it something different?
Different than the strict form. I have written a couple of sonnets. My strength is in the free form, the free verse, what Walt Whitman changed everything to be. When Walt Whitman came over, he was the father of free verse, and basically changed that you didn't have to rhyme, but to get your feelings out there. I mean, Walt Whitman at the very beginning with Leaves of Grass was trashed, it wasn't acceptable, and he just kept adding and adding until it got to the value that it is today. And I find that the easiest. People think that rhyming is easier poetry. Rhyming is more difficult poetry because you need to get that emotion into the rhyme. So I prefer not to, although I have used some forms from time to time.
Okay, so Whitman is one of your inspirations?
Oh yes, Whitman has been my inspiration. The struggle in the beginning, like every poet struggles in the beginning. Nobody wakes up a poet, I believe. So he had the same struggles, I had the struggles. When after that first publication, I thought, I can write poetry. I got 12 submissions, and I put them all together, and I got 12 rejections. So, I mean, the struggle at the very beginning, if you don't stay with it, it will never happen. And I think that that's something that Walt Whitman inspired.
Now, do you create in any other literary form? Do you write short stories, novels, plays, anything like that?
No. I dabbled with a children's short story specifically for my daughters when they were very young. Never did anything with it. It's somewhere in the closet, but no, I do not write in any other form.
Well, I think it's time for another poem, Bob. Do you have
Okay.
another?
Imagine. It'll always be a day to remember. That 11th day of the 9th month of the 2nd year of the 21st century. New York City, a victim. Its civilian and uniformed heroes, victims. Imagine the individuals. Imagine the multitudes. Thousands of flowers, thousands of tears, gatherings in silent prayer. Imagine this day vanishing into cloud breaks of emptiness, without a memory, muddled by scrambled affliction and scaffolding plans of tomorrow. There are faces in the light above, wandering about, traveling together. Imagine their wind-tell tales.
"9/11 is something that affected every American deeply, and I believe every New Yorker especially was touched by that, as obviously you were. So I'd like to hear some more of your poems. Do you have any more for us?
Sure. This poem is the most stolen on the internet, and I don't mind it at all. I don't care about copyright. If they steal it, I love it. That means they like it. The title is October's Opel. It's taken up as it's interpreted as a poem about fall because of the leaves and the colors. It was written for my wife, whose birthday is in October, with opal being the precious stone. It was also put to music by a young composer called Yung Shen Chao, who was a finalist in the Conservatorio Vincenzo Bellini in Palermo. And he wrote the music, took the words, and brought it there. Semi-finalist, didn't finish in the tops, but it was just quite an honor for this poem. So I'll read this. October's Opal for Sabrina. October is here once again, barely transcending the threshold of autumn. The maple is turning yellow to orange to red, soon to be bared by winter. Ah, winter, when blankets of bliss cover spoon-fit bodies, flickering sparks to flames, until love of spring gardens becomes the rapture of summer bloom. And looking from outside in beyond recognizable beauty, the ruby of jewels glows bright, pumping currents of rivers red, deep into the wells of every extremity. Our chest fills with laughter. When apart, even so brief, this season stays with you, whether I am or not, and your voice with me through wind's immutable breath.
Thank you, Bob.
Yes.
Have you ever thought about which are your best poems, and is that different from those which are your favorite poems?
I never thought about what is my best. I feel that trying to single out what is my best is almost like trying to single out which one is my best grandchild. So I don't know how to do that well. My favorite poems are the ones that attracted me by my family, my wife, the one that I wrote for my granddaughter. I have one that I wrote for the last visit that I spent with my father. I think those were the most important to me.
Do you happen to have that one with you, the one with your father?
Yes, I do.
I'd love to hear that.
Last drop of wine. It hurt me to see the lifetime a running down, you holding on, not letting go, me holding on to you. Tangerine skies fade to ashen, return slower each time it rains. Raindrops we never allowed, and they take longer to run down the bridge of your nose than mine. I came to drink wine like we always do, talk about the Yankees and how we'd argue over the best player. You'd say Joe D, and I'd say the Mick. We laugh hard over years of floating that bottle. When it becomes lighter, my fingers dance erratically. You reach over, clench my wrist, try to squeeze out every last memory.
Such a sad thing to lose a loved one, but that's a beautiful way of expressing it, Bob.
Yeah.
Bob, do you have another poem for us? I think we have time for one more.
One more, okay. I'll read something a little bit lighter.
Okay,
that's
thank you.
just lighter. And hopefully the Catholic people will appreciate it. It's just meant in fun. Make no revision. Once a year it's a requirement of Catholicism to confess sins. But I didn't know priests can see you now as clear as if it were the meat aisle in Pathmark on Friday. He never asked me how long it had been. It was written across my face. But he asked how I've sinned. Father, I've disobeyed spell check twice a day, dangled participles regularly, coveted O'Hara's lines once, pirated Pound's words 4 times, and stole the only copy of On the Road from the local library my junior year. I'm envious of Rexroth and Rimbaud, and lust for lines that intoxicate the atmosphere in the White Horse Tavern. As an act of forgiveness, my son, gather your thoughts. Write 1 villanelle, 3 haiku, and 1 sestina. You will not erase or strike out, risk losing the moment of creation like this moment of confession.
That was wonderful. I loved it. I loved it. Well, Bob, it has been a real pleasure to have you here. I want to wish you the best with your poetry, and I know you have 2 books of poems. Do you want to show them for our audience? You brought 2, or you have more
3.
than that? You have 3 books of poetry.
The rest is, yeah.
Okay, so what's this first one called?
This is Fireballs of Illuminated Scarecrows. So this was basically the small chapbook of dark poetry.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The collection, which was inside a turtle shell, which my wife actually took the photo of the cover at the park near our house.
Beautiful.
And this is my child, no distance between us. This is the Italian-American poets of Long Island, 47 of them, including 4 poets laureate. So those are my books.
And that's the one that has the Italian translations of the English poems.
And this one I give to you as a gift for today.
Oh, what a wonderful gift. That is really something. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Radici ancestrali. Famiglia e cibo gettano le basi, cristallizzano una cultura per riempire pagine di storia. Non acqui povero fra pastori bucolici nel cuore verde del Mediterraneo. Nacque come un giovane principe nel quartiere del Queens, il maggiore delle generazioni più giovani, crescendo in un villaggio familiare fatto di cugini, zie e zii, alcuni senza nessun legame di sangue. Mangio ancora panini al pepe ed uova, gli stessi che un tempo comprava per le gite del venerdì ai campi, mentre i compagni di classe mangiavano burro di nicciolini e marmellata spalmati sul Wonder Bread. Bevo vino fatto con la stessa uva delle viti del nostro giardino, condisco tutto con i peperoncini, l'agnello e la carne che prediligo. Quanto siamo simili, così tanto che sono diventato te. Spesso mi allungo verso l'alto, l'esamino l'ampiezza del mondo, immagino il soffitto illuminato dalla luce della tua saggezza. Sono l'albero più vecchio che ancora resta in piedi. Le nostre radici si diramano su questo nuovo terreno di abbondanza, con molti a condividere la stessa ricetta d'amore.